There is a version of Brazil that the football world has been waiting to see for a very long time. Not the Brazil of cautious pressing and defensive pragmatism. Not the Brazil of managerial instability and qualification anxiety. The real Brazil. The one that plays as if the sport was invented specifically for them. The one that makes fullbacks look like wingers, and wingers look like artists, and the whole thing look less like a game and more like a performance for which the rest of the world didn't get a ticket. For a long stretch of this World Cup cycle that Brazil was missing, the results were worrying, the performances were flat, the identity was unclear. Critics questioned whether one of the most storied footballing nations on the planet had fundamentally lost something, not just form, but philosophy. Not just wins, but the very idea of what Brazilian football is supposed to be. And then, weeks before the World Cup, they scored six goals. One game. A statement so loud it cut through 2 years of noise, doubt, and debate and said, simply, Brazil is back. And if you weren't paying attention, you should start now. To understand what 6 goals means in this context, you need to understand the specific weight that expectation places on the Brazilian national team. Brazil is the only nation to have participated in every single FIFA World Cup. They have won it 5 times, more than any other country in history. The names on their historic roster read like a mythology textbook. Pelé, Garrincha, Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Zico, Rivaldo, Cafu, Roberto Carlos. Their 1970 squad is still widely cited as the greatest international football team ever assembled. Their 1982 squad, which didn't even win the tournament, is celebrated for playing football of such beauty that the result almost became irrelevant. That history is the burden and the blessing of every player who puts on the yellow jersey. They are not simply expected to win. They are expected to win a certain way, with flair, with creativity, with the kind of flowing, instinctive, joyful football that the Brazilians call Jogo, Bonito, the beautiful game. Anything less than that, regardless of the scoreline, is considered a failure of identity. The period leading into the 2026 World Cup was, by those standards, a crisis. Brazil cycled through managers. Their qualification campaign in CONMEBOL, historically the most brutal in world football, was uneven and at times genuinely alarming. A squad packed with elite club-level talent was consistently failing to translate that quality into international results. The performances lacked cohesion. The pressing was disjointed. The attacking patterns were predictable. And the fan base, historically patient with star quality, was running out of patience. Then came the 6 goals, and everything the previous 2 years had built. The narrative of decline, the identity crisis, the anxiety started to shift. Here's the thing about a 6-goal performance from Brazil before a World Cup. It doesn't just matter as a football result. It matters as a cultural signal. Football in Brazil is not a sport in the way that other countries experience sport. It is woven into the national identity at a constitutional level. The way Brazil plays football is understood, both inside the country and internationally, as an expression of something deeper, of creativity, of improvisation, of the Brazilian spirit in its most distilled form. When Brazil plays badly, it is not just a team having a rough patch. It registers as a national mood. Politicians comment on it. Economists are asked about it. It becomes a referendum on something much larger than 11 players on a pitch. The 2022 World Cup exit. A penalty shootout loss to Croatia in the quarterfinals after Neymar's extraordinary extra-time goal had briefly made everything feel possible, devastated the country in a way that results from other nations rarely replicate. It wasn't just a loss. It was a loss that felt incomplete, a talent without a destination, a generation that hadn't finished its sentence. The 2026 World Cup is a chance to write a different ending. And that 6-goal performance, timed the way it was, functions as the opening line of a new chapter. It doesn't guarantee anything. Football never guarantees anything, but it reminded a global audience of something that had been obscured by months of inconsistency. When Brazil are moving, when they're clicking, when the pieces align, there is nothing in world football that looks quite like it. The road to this moment was neither short nor comfortable. After the 2022 World Cup, Tite, who had managed Brazil since 2016 and guided them to the top of the CONMEBOL qualification table with a record points total, left the role. He had been the architect of the qualifying dominance, but had also been criticized for a pragmatic, structured style that never fully satisfied the Brazilian public's appetite for flair. His exit left a vacancy not just in the technical staff, but in the philosophical identity of the team. Fernando Diniz took the role on an interim basis, bringing an expansive, possession-based methodology that excited fans intellectually but struggled to produce consistent results in the compressed schedule of international football. International breaks are not the environment for implementing complex positional systems. The gaps between games are too long. The player pool changes. The integration time simply doesn't exist. Diniz was eventually replaced by Dorival Júnior, a domestic title winner with significant experience in Brazilian club football, but not a name that commanded instant global recognition or excitement. Under Dorival, Brazil's results improved, but the performances remained inconsistent. There were flashes of the quality that everyone knew the squad possessed. Vinícius Júnior, the Real Madrid forward who had been in the form of his life at club level, was delivering moments of genuine brilliance. Rodrygo, Endrick, the teenager who had forced his way into the conversation through sheer force of personality and ability. Raphinha, Lucas Paquetá, the creative options were extraordinary on paper, but paper quality and tournament cohesion are different things. Brazil's squad, for all its individual excellence, had not yet found the collective expression that translates individual brilliance into team dominance. The qualification process itself had been its own drama. CONMEBOL's 10-team round-robin format is relentless. Every game is against a nation motivated to beat the biggest name in international football. Brazil draws the best efforts from every opponent they face. That structural disadvantage makes their historical dominance of South American qualifying all the more remarkable and makes their periods of uncertainty all the more conspicuous. The 6-goal game arrived as the culmination of weeks of growing confidence. Training sessions were reported as sharp and cohesive. The internal atmosphere, by multiple accounts, had shifted. And when the match unfolded, with goals distributed across the squad, with the movement fluid, with Vinícius orchestrating the kind of chaos that only world-class forwards can produce, it felt like something had finally clicked. The goals themselves told a story beyond the scoreline. It wasn't a 6-0 against a low-ranked opposition inflated by a favorable draw. The quality of the performance, the variety of the goals, the interplay between the lines, the speed of the transitions, the finishing, was what made analysts pay attention. Each goal felt like a different dimension of Brazil's attacking capacity being unlocked simultaneously. Set pieces, individual brilliance, combination play, counter-attacking precision, fluid movement in the final third. When a team scores in that many different ways in a single game, it signals something important. They are not relying on one mechanism. They are not dependent on one player being in form or one tactical pattern functioning correctly. The threat is distributed, and a distributed attacking threat is the most difficult thing to defend against at tournament level, where opposition scouts have studied your patterns for months. The reaction globally was instant. Pundits who had spent months cataloging Brazil's problems pivoted. Former players who had been critical of the setup offered cautious reevaluations. Social media oscillated between ecstasy and skepticism, but the dominant note was recognition. Something had changed. Within Brazil, the response was seismic. Viewing figures for national team games, already enormous by global standards, spiked. The public conversation shifted from anxiety to anticipation, and the players, visibly, felt it. The post-match press conference energy was different. The body language and training camp footage was different. Momentum in football is not a myth. It is a measurable, transferable force. And Brazil had found it at exactly the right time. What this 6-goal moment really reveals is something about the nature of footballing identity and what happens when a nation rediscovers its own story. Brazil's football history is a continuous argument with itself. Every generation of the national team is judged not just against the opposition they face, but against the ghost of every great Brazil team that came before them. That is an impossible standard by any rational measure. The 1970 squad played in a different era, against different opposition, under different tactical conditions. Comparing any modern team to Pelé, Jorginho, and Tostão as if the comparison is fair is obviously irrational. And yet it persists, because the Brazilian football culture demands it, because the expectation of beauty is baked into the national football identity at such a foundational level that it cannot simply be abandoned in favor of pragmatic realism. Other nations can grind. Brazil is not permitted to grind without losing something of itself. That pressure, the weight of identity, of history, of expectation, is precisely what makes this moment significant. The 6-goal performance didn't just produce a result. It produced a feeling. The feeling that the team had reconnected with something the difficult months had temporarily obscured. Not just a tactical system, an expression, a way of playing the game that feels specifically, unmistakably Brazilian. Geopolitically, the timing matters too. The 2026 World Cup is hosted across North America, the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It is the largest World Cup in history by participating nations, with 48 teams competing. The tournament arrives in a moment of intense global attention on American cultural and political influence. Into that context, Brazil arriving as a resurgent force, culturally vibrant, footballing joyful, politically complex, carries a symbolism that extends well beyond the competition itself. Brazil is always more than a football team in a World Cup. It is a global projection of a country's identity, and the country it projects has always been at its most powerful when it is playing without fear. The long-term consequence of this form that holds through the tournament extends beyond the trophy. It validates the coaching approach, it gives a generation of players a defining moment. It provides the next crop of Brazilian footballers, the ones watching from school classrooms and favela streets and suburban living rooms across the country, with a reference point. A proof that the beautiful game didn't die. It just took a breath. Brazil looked lost, and then they scored 6. That's the headline. But the story underneath the headline is about something that football occasionally, mercifully, allows us to witness. A great institution rediscovering what made it great. Not through a tactical revolution, not through a transfer window or a managerial masterstroke. Through the organic, unpredictable, almost mysterious process by which a group of elite individuals stop playing alongside each other and start playing as one. The World Cup will provide its own answers. The knockout rounds will test everything. A bad day, an injury, a penalty shootout. Football has ended more perfect stories than any other sport on earth. But right now, in this moment, before the tournament begins, Brazil have given the world a reason to believe again. Not in a scoreline, not in statistics, in the way they played. And if you've ever watched Brazil play football the way it's supposed to be played, you know exactly why that matters. The World Cup starts now.